Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Donald Trump arrives at Capitol Hill for his inauguration, where he'll be sworn in as US President for the second time.
We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And we will make America great again. Thank you very much.
Donald Trump's brand new Bitcoin token soars to a total value of nearly $11 billion in the hours before he takes office.
Stop the clocks. Trump saves TikTok, an 11th hour reprieve for the popular video sharing platform after its ban.
I'm here in Davos, where government and business leaders are gathering for the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. What's their take on the new Trump presidency?
Donald Trump is returning to the White House in about an hour's time. He'll be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States.
He's with his predecessor Joe Biden ahead of what will be his second inauguration. It will take place indoors due to freezing weather, the first time that's happened in 40 years. Trump, who was first elected president in 2016, is due to sign dozens of executive orders to reverse some of the policies enacted by Biden.
We begin a brand new day of American strength and prosperity, dignity and pride. We're going to bring back law and order to our cities. We're going to restore patriotism to our schools, get radical left, woke ideologies the hell out of our military and out of our government. And we are going to make America great again.
Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrace in New York. John, we await the ceremonials and the formal transfer of power. Then it's down to business. What's the feeling there on tariffs?
You know, it's really funny, Jamie, as all this is going on in Washington, D.C., and I'm actually on duty in New York City, which once upon a time was the capital. The capital was here for a while, and indeed George Washington, the first president, was sworn in less than half a kilometre from where I'm standing at the moment, and he addressed the troops after the Revolutionary War at Bowling Green, just over there, really not very far. I can't see it because the buildings are in the way these days, but he did. And then, of course, they decided to send the political capital, as it were, to Washington, D.C., which was just a swamp in those days. There was nothing there, and they left the financial capital, as it were, here in New York, and that's the way it is today. But here on Wall Street, I will tell you the number one concern about this businessman returning to the White House, which he will in a couple of hours' time, is tariffs. This is the big issue that is overriding everything. Now, if those tariffs are aggressive, then the inclination on Wall Street is going to be sell off potentially quite big time. Now, the background to this is that President Biden, who's leaving office in the next hour or so, is handing on a pretty strong economy to Donald Trump. I mean, he really is. The problem that Biden had at the election was that the folks on the ground just are not feeling it. You know, for them, milk, butter, eggs, all of these things, the basics of life here are still very elevated. And that was one of Biden's problems. But the economy overall is really quite strong. Job creation is strong. As you know, consumer sentiment, despite what I've just said, is pretty good, really. And also inflation is coming down, and it has come down under Joe Biden's time in office. So the big question here is, if Trump goes ahead with these tariffs on Mexico and Canada and the European Union now, and of course most likely China, as you know, the question is, will that hobble the economy? What will that do to the economy, which is doing pretty good? Now, a couple of things have happened. President Trump and President Xi spoke by telephone at the back end of last week. It was at the request of Donald Trump, we're told. We're told that the call was very cordial and both men were on the same page about a lot of things, trying to make the world a better place. So we'll see. I think what's going to happen, Paul and Jamie, is that 2025 is going to be a very volatile year. Whatever the new administration does that is good will be rewarded by stocks going up, and whatever is bad will be rewarded by by stocks going down quite badly. So much depends on what the new president actually does and when he does it. And none of us know what that's going to be or quite how it's going to be. The markets, ironically, are closed today in New York. which is why I'm outside. And the reason for that is not because of the inauguration, actually. It is because of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, the day that honors the slain civil rights leader. But it is just ironic that it's taking place on the same day as the inauguration this time round. Guys?
John, I should explain that while you're speaking, we're also watching pictures of VIPs and family members and political guests from around the world, or some of them anyway, taking their seats in expectation of Mr. Trump and the beginning of his inauguration in about 50 minutes or so. While we stay with those pictures, let me ask you about Mr. Trump's new crypto token.
I know. Isn't it interesting? I tell you, the crypto world is not too happy with Mr. Trump, which is ironic, really, because they are delighted with him because he's backing cryptocurrency and wants to make America the cryptocurrency of the world. He started last July in Nashville at this huge Bitcoin conference saying that he wanted to do that. And as a result of what he said and his election in November, Bitcoin has been absolutely soaring on the international markets, as you know. But then over the weekend, President Trump and Melania came out with their own meme coins. One is called Dollar Trump, the other one is called Dollar Melania. And you're right, the Trump one has soared in value to $10 or $11 billion, something like that. The Melania one has soared in value to around $1 billion. Now, what you must understand about these coins, they are for fun. Okay, they're not serious coins, they're for fun, like Dogecoin. Dogecoin is another one which is not really for fun, for use. It's for fun. When I say it's not really for use, it doesn't really have any utility behind it. Bitcoin does, Ethereum does, you can buy things with those coins, but with these Trump and Melania coins, you're not going to be able to do very much with them except invest in them. Trump, of course, is going to distance himself from them now. Cryptocurrency, industry not terribly happy about this. They see this as a cash grab by the Trump people. 80% of Dollar Trump is owned by the Trump people, so they've already made a lot of money because, this coin has traction. And it's going to have traction going forward simply because people want to be associated with the new president. The fact that he's created these coins is a reason for them around the world to invest in it. So I think that, they're not going to go away. In the meantime, Bitcoin seems to me to have gone up in value over the weekend, mainly because they did launch these coins. On Friday, Bitcoin was at $104,000, and that was after the President Xi call. And now today it's around 109, somewhere between $106,000 and $109,000 per token. That's Bitcoin. And that's a gain just today of around $5,000.
John, we'll come back to you later in the hour, but for the moment, thank you for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York.
Let's have a look at how the Asian market shared, and Chinese stocks have jumped following talks on Friday between President Xi Jinping and the US President-elect Donald Trump, as John was just talking about. They were viewed positively by the markets, those talks over the phone. The Shenzhen Stock Exchange Composite Index closed almost 1% higher. The Shanghai Composite Index closed up nearly 0.2%, while the Hang Seng in Hong Kong closed nearly 1.8% higher after rising by as much as 2.6% earlier in the day.
China says it's ready to work with the United States. China's President Xi Jinping's special representative, the Vice President, Hang Jun, made his comments in Washington, where he met Vice President J.D. Vance, the tech billionaire Elon Musk, and other members of the United States business community. Han will attend the inauguration of President Trump. China's foreign ministry has reiterated the importance of cooperation between China and the US.
China has always believed that a stable, healthy, and sustainable China-US relationship is in the common interests of the two countries and the expectations of the international community. China is willing to work with the new US administration to uphold the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and a win-win cooperation. Both sides should also strengthen communication, properly manage differences, expand mutual beneficial cooperation, and find a way to get along correctly in the new era for the benefit of both countries and the world.
Ina Tangen is a senior fellow at the Tai-He Institute, and he says that Beijing is cautiously optimistic about the new Trump administration.
The phone call, different readouts, of course. Trump was pushing his agenda. Xi Jinping was talking about peace and cooperation and Taiwan. But everyone's waiting for his 200 executive orders. Some are proclamations, some are policy. And although we know the different areas he's going to concentrate, we do not know the specifics of what he's going to sign.
You mentioned the cautious optimism with the government there in Beijing. What is the expectation for tariffs? China clearly in the sights for increased tariffs along with Canada and Mexico. How is Beijing positioned to retaliate, to respond to tariffs if they are raised?
Well, I mean, Beijing's position has been to a measured response. They do not want to escalate, but they are not going to just stand still and take it on the chin. So, I mean, you can expect that to continue. There's some sense that Donald Trump has been told that if he puts 60% tariffs on Chinese goods, the effect on the American consumer, who already feels hard-pressed, would be quite dramatic. So he's probably going to put a lesser amount on and then promise that he'll raise it unless he gets what he wants. It might be a phase 2 of, China buying more stuff from the United States. But I think he's going to kind of position as I'm giving Xi Jinping a gift because I'm not putting 60% on, I'm doing something less.
The new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in his testament before the Senate, had seemed to indicate that he does not believe that there will be any kind of military or trade conflict between China and the United States, that there isn't any appetite for that on either side. How do you assess the incoming foreign policy stance of the Trump administration?
Well, I think you have to look at his entire team. I mean, they're mostly very photogenic, not necessarily qualified, and they seem more like the cast of the 5th episode, or I should say 5th season, of The Apprentice Washington, all fairly much expendable. The reason China is cautiously optimistic is because he's transactional. They believe that at least he's not going to push a war, that, if you give them enough money or you can find some way of dealing with them, that you can arrive at something. So that is better than Biden, who was very difficult to talk to in the sense that he was very ideological. He believed in American exceptionalism, and he was, prepared to, as he said 5 times, go to the defense of Taiwan. And they were pushing that, more arms and things like this. So this is why China is cautiously optimistic. They have an open hand towards the United States, and they're hoping that they can kind of weather the storm. Like I said, this is not 2016. China is in a completely different position, but the expectation is that Trump will stick to his old game plan.
Donald Trump's threat of tariffs on all imported goods is likely to dominate the first day of the World Economic Forum in Switzerland.
Thousands of politicians and business leaders from more than 130 countries are arriving in Davos. Our correspondent Juliet Mann is there. Juliet, what's the mood ahead of Mr. Trump's inauguration?
Jamie, the roll call of heads of state and government and titans of industry who are going to be addressing delegates here at the World Economic Forum has created a real buzz of anticipation. But I have to say that the Davos crowd is a little bit distracted today. It's all about the inauguration. They're on inauguration watch up and down the town. And there's a real nervousness because you've been talking about those tariffs that Trump has been promising, 10 to 20% on imports from Europe, 60% on goods from China. And all of that has created huge uncertainty around the US's relationships around the world. And the markets are hoping that once Trump is in power, in the White House, then maybe there'll be some clarity around taxes, around tariffs, and that will clear the way for deal-making to be done. I'm joined now by, well, what's become a Davos regular, Lisa Donoghue, who's the co-head of Americas and Asia at Alex Partners, the consultancy. Great to see you again. Now, you are turnaround guys. So you've been leading large businesses in the complexities of business transformation. Yeah. So to what extent has all this uncertainty around what the US administration is going to do affected all that?
You know, it's an interesting dynamic. We do a disruption index every year to measure the amount of concern and trepidation of CEOs, global CEOs. And I think that given dealing with COVID and dealing with uncertainty, supply chain disruptions, war in Ukraine, all of those challenges globally have made CEO and leaders a bit more resilient, a bit more prepared for whatever comes their way. And it's refreshing. Now, 60% tariffs will be tough for anyone to deal with, but I like to think that as the market, we're going to be looking at deals being made versus, decisions that will have long-standing ramifications that no one really wants.
So, look, Trump has said that it's going to be tariffs all the way. Other parts of the world could say, OK, let's work with that and just absorb the extra costs, or they could bring in their own duties regime. What's your take on the world becoming more protectionist?
Well, we're such a globally integrated economy. The supply chains I just mentioned, disruption from the supply chains happened because of the war in Ukraine, and the impacts were far standing around the world. So I think protectionism, in my opinion, is a bad idea. I think that trying to find common ground and the right approach to what makes sense from a pricing perspective, from a protection of IP perspective, a protection of one's shores perspective, is inevitable, but I'd like to think that we are going to be able to come up with something a bit more collaborative. And look, it's the spirit of what we're working on right now here in Davos is collaboration.
You haven't mentioned intelligence. You haven't mentioned artificial intelligence. You haven't mentioned sustainability. Those are top of the agenda, right?
Top of the agenda, and what's driving, if you think about the leaps and bounds in AI and what that means from the insatiable need for data, also means insatiable need for electricity and power, which goes right toward what are sustainable solutions. How do we get to the energy transition that we all want while still dealing with the exponential increase in demand that we're seeing?
We will hear keynote speakers from world leaders and heads of institution, among them China's Vice President Ding Xuexiang. That's going to be interesting, but who else are you most interested in hearing from?
Well, I always like hearing from the tech guys because right now we're such a tech-driven business economy. So I'm interested in hearing from the AI guys, the folks from Palantir, because they deal with big data in massive amounts and make it understandable. And I'm interested in, of course, I'm interested in the Vice President of China. I'm very interested to hear what he has to say.
Lisa Donoghue, always a pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Great to see you.
If I could just nudge you out the way, though, so I continue the report. Thank you so much. Look, one of the headliners, as we've been talking about on Tuesday, is China's Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang. China's published some encouraging data lately, but the economy is still waiting on more stimulus measures. I spoke to the Managing Director of the World Economic Forum, Jeremy Jurgens, about his take on what he's hoping to hear when Vice Premier Ding addresses delegates on Tuesday.
I'd really like to hear, one, how the recent policy announcements that have been made on the kind of fiscal stimulus, economic stimulus, how those are playing out, what that means. Also, what the vision is for high quality growth, how they see that playing out, and what China's doing to boost domestic consumption. I think these are all key questions that both myself and many other leaders participating here are looking forward to hearing from his visit.
And there are lots of panels here too, looking at the changing conversation in terms of the global south. China plays a key role there too.
Yeah, definitely. We have over 500 sessions, and as you mentioned, a lot of those are focused on economic development. One of our sub-themes is around reimagining growth. So growth that's sustainable, growth that's inclusive, and that actually creates prosperity for all. I think this is very similar to the Chinese model and the Chinese outlook, but seeing how that's interpreted and represented here, I think will be really great opportunity.
Whenever the world's business and economic elite meet here in Davos, it also reignites the debate around global inequality and that increasing gap, that growing gap between the super rich and the rest of the world, ordinary people. And as usual, that's meant there have been some protests. On Sunday, there was quite a large march with anti-World Economic Forum and anti-billionaire placards. Greenpeace staged a sit-in at the heliport here, and some activists were preventing people who landed by helicopter from leaving the heliport to get to where they needed to go here in Davos. Paint was thrown at Amazon House, and that's up on the promenade in town, where a lot of corporations have set up shop and have mini offices where they court clients all week. But what that goes to show is that there are many people here, all with a voice, even on the periphery of proceedings. They've got a voice on where the world is heading and how to strengthen partnerships to shape a sustainable and intelligent future. And that's one of the reasons why we're here all week. So do stay with us. We'll be coming back to you every day live here from Davos, bringing you insights and reaction from the world's most influential people. Back to you, Paul. Back to you, Jamie.
Juliet, looking forward to that. Thank you very much. Our correspondent Juliet Mann in Davos.
Thanks, Juliet. In other news, China insists it has followed World Trade Organization rules after a complaint by the European Commission. The Commission has accused the Chinese of illegal trade practices in setting worldwide royalty rates for standard essential patents without the owner's consent. China says it regrets the EU's action, saying channels for communication have always been open.
Political instability in South Korea has forced a downgrade of the country's economic outlook. The central bank revised down its 2025 growth forecast to 1.6%. That's 0.2% lower than its November projection. Impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration of martial law in December and weakening domestic demand have fueled economic uncertainty.
China has introduced a subsidy for consumers buying electronic products. Each item will receive a payment covering 15% of the sales price, but a consumer can only buy one subsidised item per category. It's Beijing's latest push to boost domestic consumption.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Let's show you the live pictures from Washington. The big question, will he get on with the folks next door? President Trump, as he's about to be, and what he has planned for neighbouring countries.
Chinese paper cutting, known as jianzhe, is thought to have originated during the 6th century CE. However, some believe that its history could be traced back further. Usually the artworks are made of red paper, as the colour red is associated with festivities and luck in Chinese culture. Cut paper artwork is used as a way of decorating doors and windows during festivals such as Chinese New Year and weddings, symbolising good wishes and happiness. The common tools used in Chinese paper cutting are scissors or an engraving knife. Yin and Yang are the two main techniques used in paper cutting. Yin refers to the process of cutting out a defined shape, whereas Yang refers to cutting out the negative space around that shape. Works are mainly divided into southern and northern styles. The southern style utilises fine and precise cuts to create intricate lace-like patterns, showcasing themes from nature such as plants and animals. The northern style is known for its exaggerated shapes and vigorous designs, emphasising strong lines, symmetry and contrast, and often features themes from Chinese mythology and historical figures. Today, paper cutting is one of the most popular folk arts in China.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Let's show you the live pictures from Washington, where Donald Trump is set to be sworn in as the 47th United States President in, 35 minutes or so. All the VIPs gathered there to watch him centre stage, and we'll keep on returning to Washington during the next few minutes or so.
While Donald Trump has again pledged to secure US borders and impose migration limits as soon as he takes office. At a rally in Washington on Sunday, he told supporters to expect a string of executive orders.
We have to set our country on the proper course. By the time the sun sets tomorrow evening, the invasion of our borders will have come to a halt, and all the illegal border trespassers will in some form or another be on their way back home.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Tony Waterman, who's at Eagle Pass in Texas on the Mexican border. Tony, good to see you. Tough talk from President-elect Donald Trump. But what might we expect in terms of action in the coming days and weeks?
Well, one of the first things that we expect the incoming president to do is to declare a national emergency along the border, and this would free up funds and other resources to carry out the Trump administration's immigration policy. So one thing that could happen is that it could mobilize military assets, National Guards troops, that would help with things like infrastructure development, the border walls that we see along the U.S.-Mexico border. They could also help build detention camps. Here in Texas, there are plans underway for areas like this to become detention camps for migrants looking to be deported. And also those National Guards troops could help keep order during what we expect to be these nationwide raids that could start in the early hours of Tuesday morning. And during the first phase, we're expecting those raids to happen in so-called sanctuary cities, these democratic strongholds that have been shielding migrants by limiting their cooperation with federal immigration officials. So places like New York, Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, Miami. There are a number of cities. And Tom Homan, who is the incoming border czar, says that really anyone who is found in these locations that are not in the U.S. legally will be primed for deportation. But really the focus right now, Trump officials say, is on gang members and criminals. But what is expected is the storming of immigrant communities, of churches, of construction sites, really anywhere that migrants are known to live and work. The Trump administration has also not ruled out family separations. Other prime targets for these deportations could be people that already have protections from the Biden administration or who have been denied asylum but still remain in the United States. Other executive orders from Donald Trump could also include an ending of birthright citizenship, the refugee relocation programs, and other types of programs that are meant to facilitate immigration, and the main purpose is to keep migrants out.
Tony, saying it is one thing, doing it is quite another. What are the concerns of the migrant groups as Mr. Trump takes office?
Well, the biggest concern are those family separations. You have a number of people that come across the U.S.-Mexico border that maybe don't have children at that point, but are here for years, for decades, and they have families, so their children are legal citizens. What happens to those family units if the parents are rounded up in some of these raids? The migrant organizations that I've been talking to are telling their members to just prepare for the worst, to get their paperwork ready, to get in contact with lawyers, and to know what their rights are in the United States, even if they are here illegally. But you're right, it's going to take a lot of cooperation for this to actually happen. There are obstacles, one of them being that Democratic states and cities have said they will not help the Trump administration carry out these deportations. Another limitation is going to be the cost. It's estimated that mass deportations will cost north of $88 billion. That is a lot of money. Trump officials saying it's cheaper than actually helping out immigrants. But those are just some of the obstacles that can stand in the way. Of course, the biggest one is going to be the legal challenges that are already in the works to come up against these new policy measures.
Tony, thank you for that. Our correspondent Tony Waterman at Eagle Pass in Texas on the Mexico border.
One of Trump's pledges on taking office is to impose new tariffs of up to 20% on imports to the United States.
He's warned imports from China could face penalties as high as 60%, threatening trade ties between the world's two largest economies. Let's talk to our correspondent, Yolo Abdavith. We've been talking about China, we've been talking about Mexico for many days on this programme, but it's worth saying that Europe will not be immune from this threat of higher tariffs either.
And wasn't been in the past either. I think it's fair to say there will be a number of countries in Europe who'll be concerned, including, I think, the United Kingdom, even though it's outside the single market now, and it has, what it likes to call a special relationship. But I think there will be a lot of countries that will be nervous. Yes, they'll be looking carefully what happens with Canada, with Mexico, and what happens with Asian countries and China. But Germany specifically will be concerned because Donald Trump, again, looking back and remembering what he said in his campaigning and when he was travelling around America, and he more than once referred to Germany and how many German cars he saw in Manhattan, in New York. So I think even now, as the German electorate and the politicians are competing against each other for the election on the 23rd of February, they're concerned and they talk about Donald Trump and the potential of 10 or 15 or 20% tariffs. And until there's more clarity, that concern will stay because possibly Friedrich Merz, who might be the next Chancellor, he says, well, look, this is predictable. We have a good idea of what Donald Trump might do. And, of course, Germans do sell a lot of cars and machinery to the Americans. The $172 billion worth last year. That's what the Americans imported. And there is a trade deficit. And Trump will try and leverage on that. So I think the Germans will be keen to see if there's any more detail, as will the European Union, as will the UK and France and many other countries.
Yolo, let's talk a bit more about the UK. You mentioned this so-called special relationship that the UK supposedly has with the United States. And, as you said, the UK is now outside the single European market after Brexit. Do you think that will actually make it easier for Britain to deal with Trump?
It could. It could be easier. There's less regulation. They're not tarred in the same way. But here's the list of problems. A number of high-ranking, including the Prime Minister, including the Foreign Minister, including Peter Mandelson, who might be the next ambassador in the United States for the United Kingdom, they've all at various times made unflattering comments about Donald Trump, even insulting in some ways, especially David Lammy as the Foreign Minister. That's a problem if Donald Trump and the people around him decide that they don't like those kind of comments. There are issues on the Chagos Islands. And now they've stopped. The UK have decided to allow Donald Trump and his new administration to have a look at what happens with the Diego Garcia base in the Indian Ocean. There's a problem with Donald Musk and how Donald Musk has used his social media platform X to attack Keir Starmer as Prime Minister and other members of the cabinet as well. There is this realignment between the UK and China, which Donald Trump might take offence to, in terms of Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, just been to China and visited to try and boost ties and, of course, the economic growth in the UK. There's a number of things in terms of his pivot towards the European Union that Donald Trump might not feel comfortable with. So, yes, there are things that I'm sure Keir Starmer and his cabinet feel they can work on, but there's a whole list there, and that's not the whole list, of the difficulties that this Labour government might have with Donald Trump's administration.
You've been reporting in Ukraine a number of times. I mean, let's talk about what comes next for Ukraine and this three-year-long conflict with Russia. How might the incoming new president achieve the ceasefire that he's been talking about for some time? He said he could deliver it within a matter of days of taking office.
He said 24 hours, and then he's rode back from that. Now he's talking about 6 months, and some of his people, like, for instance, his new envoy, Mr. Kellogg, says that, possibly within the 100 days. There's no details yet how he might persuade Vladimir Putin and Russia to hold back. How will he placate Volodymyr Zelensky in terms of whether he wants less money being spent? And, $175, $180 billion have been spent by the Americans on trying to support Ukraine, so that if there's less money, what comes there instead to placate Zelensky? We'll wait for the details, but for sure, he said it so often, he wants the killing to stop, he wants the war to end. So I think he's pretty clear about that, and I think we are looking to see what exactly he will do, including, of course, meeting Vladimir Putin, and I think that could happen quite quickly this year.
Yolo, thank you. Our correspondent, Yolo Abdavith. Well, the inauguration of Donald Trump is being watched closely thousands of miles away in Greenland, the autonomous territory of Denmark. Mr. Trump's controversial remarks about buying the island and not ruling out military force to take it has sparked some concern there. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas is in the capital, Nuuk. Evangelo, what's the view today there?
Well, the snow is coming down pretty much. The weather is quite cold, but I have to say the temperature, the political temperature, is quite high up. A lot of the people are in their houses right now, glued on their screens to see what will happen after Donald Trump will be sworn into office. We spoke to a lot of people. Some are concerned what the next day might bring for Greenland, perhaps some more military on the ground here. Others are saying, on the other hand, that that is a good thing because they will like to protect Greenland, as if Denmark cannot provide that to them at a given moment. But with me right now, I do have a local politician and a political advisor, Mr. Karsok. Tell us a little bit, how are Greenlanders seeing this inauguration and Donald Trump being sworn into office?
The first thing is, again, because it's not the first time we had it, but we had a lot of activities after that, so we're taking it not so literally. But we're taking it, all, of course, with care, but also with a more optimism than normally. Maybe some would have taken it.
And what will the next day look like for Greenlanders? What would you see coming for Greenland after Donald Trump is in office?
Maybe not just one binary country, not just Denmark, also not just the U.S., but also a lot of countries that there will be more interest in regarding to Greenland and its prosperity in the future, also in regarding to gaining independence, which is always an agenda in Greenland. So it might be a shock to Western alliances, what has been said, but it's not the first time, right? We had some experience in 2019. So that's why it is an interesting time that we are seeing with optimism. So let's see, we're having a watch party to watch what the incoming president will have to say.
And that's what most of the people are feeling like here. They're seeing this with, some of them are seeing it with optimism, but others are also seeing it with worries. But the one thing is for sure is that because of these remarks of Donald Trump, Greenland is on the spotlight and the world is getting to know this island again.
Evangelo, thank you for that. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Nuuk in Greenland. And while Evangelo was speaking, we were watching the live pictures from Washington and the final VIPs taking their seats for the inauguration, which takes place in about 20 minutes' time. There's the outgoing president, Joe Biden, taking his position as the formal ceremony begins, and that's the last time he will walk to the sound that you're hearing there. The next time you hear that, Donald Trump will be president. So the inauguration there taking place at the US Capitol in Washington. Both Mr. Trump and his Vice President, Mr. Vance, will take part in a swearing-in ceremony at midday local time, 1700 GMT. They will take the oath of office, and the new president, Mr. Trump, then gives what's called his inaugural presidential address, which will be his first speech since officially taking office, his first speech to the United States. The president then heads off on his first official duties, and you'll be pleased to hear they will then enjoy an inaugural lunch before reviewing the military and leading them in a procession. The ceremony, if you're wondering, has been moved indoors to freezing temperatures outside Washington, outside that building. I think it's about minus 13 degrees. And the last time I think this took place inside was for the inauguration of President Ronald Reagan, which was decades ago. Mr. Trump expected to address the country from the White House and then attend 3 balls or parties this evening. Outside the building, they're expecting something like 200,000 supporters expecting to visit the city to mark this presidential transfer of power, I guess. Mr. Trump, as we've been reporting on this program, is promising to sign a blitz of executive orders on this first day. As we've been saying, he's promising to move with historic speed to sign dozens and dozens of executive orders.
Seeing live pictures here from the rotunda of the US Capitol on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. This, of course, is J.D. Vance, the incoming Vice President, his wife just there to his right shoulder there. And just on the left of the picture there is Donald Trump Jr., the son of the incoming President Donald Trump. Of course, his second term in office. Not consecutive terms in office, of course. And a very poignant moment as well for outgoing President Biden, and of course his Vice President Kamala Harris, who we just saw there, who lost to Donald Trump in the election in November. The Democrats in somewhat of a state of disarray at the moment, and Donald Trump very much having secured all levers of power, really, in Washington and of the Republican Party.
Now, if you're watching this as an ordinary human being, like Paul and me, you might be enjoying the ceremony. If you're a political leader in the rest of the world, you might well be watching, wondering what Mr. Trump's second term might look like. Is he going to deliver on these sweeping reforms that we've been reporting on? His critics, as you might be reading over the last few days, have been suggesting that he'll try and rule the United States as something of an autocrat. Mr. Biden used his last speech to warn of what he described as a dangerous oligarchy of billionaires gathering around Mr. Trump, that Mr. Biden said threatened democracy. Mr. Trump, of course, his supporters will point out, has a very clear mandate after that election victory in November. And here he is, Mr. Trump, Donald Trump, the president-elect, making the last few steps as president-elect. Very shortly, we will refer to him as Mr. President, President Donald Trump, for the second time.
First Lady Melania Trump there in the hat. Something of an air kiss, it seemed, for the First Lady, the incoming First Lady.
All smiles today, but of course it is worth remembering that many people in Washington will be wondering what the president's first few acts will mean for them. Mr. Trump has promised to, in his words, fire huge numbers of civil servants. Mr. Trump thinks that there's fair old opposition towards him within the United States government that will perhaps frustrate what he wants to do. So he's promised that those people who frustrate his plans might be removed.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
Let's listen in for a few moments to the ceremony in Washington. I wonder what's going through their minds. Not just Mr. Trump, his advisors, but also
Congressional Committee on
his political opponents,
the
who
Honorable Amy Klobuchar.
perhaps sit there thinking it could have all been very different if our side had won.
This is a Democratic
Good morning,
Senator, Amy
everyone.
Klobuchar.
Welcome to the 60th presidential inauguration. Today, President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Vance will take their oaths of office, and we will witness the peaceful transfer of power at the heart of our democracy. For the past year, I've chaired the inaugural ceremony committee, which includes the leadership of Congress from both parties. We thank the committee and Capitol staff and law enforcement who worked so hard over the last year, and especially the last 3 days. You've done a beautiful job, and you have shown grace under pressure. Our theme this year is our enduring democracy. The presence of so many presidents and vice presidents here today is truly a testament to that endurance. We welcome President Biden and Dr. Biden. We welcome Vice President Harris and Doug Emhoff, President Obama, President Clinton and Secretary Clinton, President Bush and Laura Bush, Vice President Pence, Vice President Quayle and Marilyn Quayle. The justices of the United States Supreme Court are with us, all 9 of them I counted, and of course the Trump and Vance families. This ceremony marks what will soon be 250 years of our democracy. It is the moment when leaders elevated by the will of the people promise to be faithful to our Constitution, to cherish and defend it. It is the moment when they become, as we all should be, the guardians of our country. Through war and peace, through adversity and prosperity, we hold this inauguration every 4 years, and today it falls on Martin Luther King Day. A further reminder that we must strive to uphold the values enshrined in our Constitution, the freedoms, the liberties, and, as is inscribed on the entrance of the United States Supreme Court, equal justice under law. But what makes this moment more than a passing ceremony is all who are watching it across the country, the people of this nation, the ordinary people doing extraordinary things. President Kennedy, who at one point worked as a senator in this building and would often walk through this very rotunda, once said, "In a democracy, every citizen, regardless of interest in politics, holds office. Every one of us is in a position of responsibility." With that responsibility of citizenship comes an obligation not to seek out malice, as President Lincoln once reminded us, but to view others with a generosity of spirit, despite our differences. With that responsibility of leadership comes an obligation to stand our ground when we must and find common ground when we can. With everything swirling around us, the hot mess of division, it is on all of us, to quote an incredible songwriter who just happened to be born in my state, to ensure that our nation's democracy is our shelter from the storm. There's a reason this ceremony takes place at the Capitol. In other countries, it might be in a presidential palace or a gilded executive office building. Here it is traditionally held at the Capitol, the People's House. It is a fitting reminder of the system of checks and balances that is the very foundation of our government. 3 equal branches of government. That is how, for nearly 250 years, our great American experiment, grounded in the rule of law, has endured. So, as we inaugurate a new president and vice president, let us remember that the power of those in this room comes from the people. the construction workers who build our country, the teachers and healthcare workers who nurture us, the troops defending our freedoms, and yes, the firefighters in Los Angeles putting themselves on the line for us. Our democracy's strength and grit must match theirs. May God bless our nation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Endurance through the years is the ultimate test. To persevere through time is the truest measure of an idea, an institution, and a nation. Our founders wrote the Constitution so that America could withstand all the twists and turns of time. They wrote it to guide us and to preserve forever our right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But as much as the truths and principles enshrined in our Constitution remain the same, our democracy promises the American people the power to change, to chart their own destiny. That's the beauty. That is the importance of democracy. It allows the endurance, the permanence of a nation through change. It allows nations like our United States both to
Well, we're
avoid
listening there
the
to
obstacles
Senator Deborah Fisher, who's one of the organising committees, overseeing the transfer of power. While we stay on those pictures, let's bring in our correspondent, John Terrett, a veteran America watcher. John, you've lived through this election campaign and so many others. As you watch this today, I wonder what goes through your mind.
Well, do stay on the pictures, Jamie, because this is history in the making, and this is the first time that we have had an inauguration ceremony in the Capitol Rotunda since 1984, when President Reagan was sworn in for his second term. And I must say, I wasn't in America then. I've been here for well over 20 years now. But I must say, I think this is adding an element of pomp and circumstance and dignifying the occasion even more so than if it were outside. When the people are outside, they're usually freezing cold. This ceremony used to be held in March. They moved it to January many, many years ago. Everyone's cold, wants to get out into the heat again. And on this occasion, everyone is there in business suits and nice dresses. They're relaxed and happy. And among the members there, not only outgoing President Biden and incoming President Trump and their wives, but also the three existing presidents, President Clinton, President Bush, number 43, and President Obama. But for a business show, I thought it might be rather fun to highlight just how many CEOs are in the room. I mean, I've seen Tim Cook from Apple. Elon Musk has been on television several times. He's Donald Trump's new best friend, as you know. And also many foreign leaders as well, including from our own country, from China. President Xi was invited by Donald Trump. He chose not to come, but he did send a very powerful delegation. They are in the room at this moment, as are many incoming cabinet members and dignitaries. And the reason it's being held, of course, is because of the frigid temperatures today in Washington, D.C. Now, after this, what will happen is that Donald Trump, the new president of the United States, the 47th president, there's only been 45 men who've held the job, of course, because 2 of them got it twice. But he is the 47th president. He will go to the Capitol Arena, which is in the middle of Washington, D.C., not far from the White House. And he's actually, would you believe, in Chinatown. And already there, thousands and thousands of his supporters waiting to greet him as the new president. After he gives an address there, he will go to the White House for the first time as the new president, where he will sign, we are told, somewhere between 100 and 200 executive orders, including immigration, border security, energy, and yes, TikTok as well. And in case you're wondering, the actual inauguration ceremony itself, the actual swearing in of the new president will take place pretty much on the stroke of midday, which by my watch is about 6 minutes away.
And John, you mentioned TikTok then. Mr. Trump already making many headlines, among them about TikTok, the Chinese-owned social media platform that was banned and briefly went dark over the weekend. Mr. Trump seems to have paused that, and TikTok's ban is sort of still in question. What's the latest?
Well, we knew he was going to do this. It was flagged up last week. TikTok went dark over the weekend because I think they felt they had an obligation to their hosts, Apple and Google and other app hosts, because had they not gone dark and had people still been downloading the app, it would have been a fine of thousands of dollars for every download of the app for Google and for Apple. And I think TikTok were trying to avoid that. They reached out to the Biden administration, who didn't get back to them. The Trump administration did and say, yeah, it's going to be okay, we're going to sign an executive order, you can come back up, and they did come back up. At the same venue where President Trump is going after this inauguration, the Capital One Arena last night, he said that his plan for TikTok, they've got a 90-day reprieve, is for ownership to be split 50-50 between an American corporation and ByteDance. That's his plan. We've got 90 days for that to happen now. The question is, of course, we don't know whether ByteDance wants to do the dance, as it were. We simply don't. And I can't tell you what the exact program of events regarding TikTok is going to be, but the headline on this inauguration day is that TikTok has got a 90-day reprieve. It is still bright. It is no longer dark. And when people go to TikTok, a little pop-up comes up, and it says, TikTok is back. Thank you, President Trump.
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent, John Terrace. You're watching CGTN live. These are the pictures from Washington, and it's 3 minutes before America witnesses this historic moment. The witching hour, almost, as power in the United States passes between two presidents, President Biden and then President Trump. The inauguration taking place inside at the U.S. Capitol in Washington. Both Mr. Trump and his Vice President, Mr. Vance, will very shortly take part in swearing ceremonies at midday, Washington time. That's about 5 o'clock GMT, and we will watch them take the oath of office. The new president then gives what's known as the inaugural address, and that will be his first speech in power to the United States since officially taking office.
We also ask that you would bless and protect Melania as First Lady. We thank you for the beauty, the warmth, and grace that she shows not only to this nation, but to the whole world.
Heads bowed in prayer there.
We thank you for Vice President-elect J.D. Vance.
As we see President-elect Donald Trump, his Vice President J.D. Vance.
May he be a strength to President Trump, to stand beside him,
one of the sons of the President, Barron, behind him,
up the arms of Moses in the midst
and
of
this historic site of the past living presidents, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton,
and he said, now stand
George
still,
Bush.
that I may reason with you before
It was a very
Lord.
different inauguration
So, Father,
ceremony
we take
when
this
Mr.
moment
Trump
to stand
first came to
still,
power.
to
You remember
the great
that
things that you
that
have done for
ceremony
this nation.
took place
Thank you for the
outside.
protection,
The weather conditions
bounty,
in
the
Washington
freedoms
today
that we
so
so
cold
enjoy.
that the inauguration
We
ceremony
remember
is being held indoors,
keep our
which might
eyes
well
fixed
be a
on you.
disappointment to the tens
May
of
our hearts be
thousands
inclined to your
of
voice.
political junkies
We know
and
that
Trump
America
fans
can never
who've
be
travelled
great
from
again
across
if we turn
America
our
to
backs
try
on
and
you.
catch
We ask for
a
your
glimpse
help.
of this, but
We pray all of
they'll
this
be
in the
watching it
name
on
of the
television,
King of
and
the Lord of Lords,
it won't
your
be
Son,
a
my
sight
Savior,
outside.
and our Redeemer,
I was in
Jesus
Washington in 2017 for Donald Trump's last inauguration, and it was raining and dark. Not as cold as it is today, but still a historic moment inside the rotunda room of the US Capitol.
The United States of America is about to have a new president. I think it's pretty much fair to say that the world is watching these moments the new beginning of the Trump years for a second time this century, and a future that Donald J. Trump
Please raise your right hand
and his family
and repeat after me.
gathered around him
I,
will
James
surely
David Vance, do
define.
solemnly swear.
From all of us in London, we'll say goodbye.
And defend